Well, hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Varela, and thank you so much for joining us for our sixth and final topic, talking about being true to your way and navigating the role of integrity for Reiki practitioners. And so over the course of the last 6 videos, we've dived into different layers of integrity for ourselves, integrity for others, integrity for culture, for business and finances, integrity for socially and environmentally. And today we're landing on integrity for Reiki itself. And both Michaela and I have been chatting about how open-ended this topic might be. I'd love to introduce my fellow co-host on this conversation, Michaela Daystar of Heartscapes Reiki. So I'd love to turn it over to you, Michaela. What do you think about having integrity for the practice of Reiki? How have you navigated that in your life, and what conclusions have you come to?
Yeah, I love that we're landing here with this question of integrity with our relationship to Reiki itself. When we originally planned this series, we talked about having an element of the mystery being held in this conversation. And for me, this is kind of where we're landing. Because when we use the word Reiki, we often use it interchangeably to mean two distinct things. And both of those are kind of open for conversation here. Firstly, we mean it we use the word to mean the phenomenon of Reiki in the world, spiritual energy, that which animates and connects us. So we can talk about our integrity with relationship to Reiki, the phenomenon. And then we can also use the word, and often do, to mean the systems of practice that we use to connect with Reiki, to interface with Reiki, to build our relationship with that phenomenon. And so I think both of those are interesting points of conversation. And when I sat with this question of what does it mean to be in integrity with Reiki itself, really I was gravitated to the first side of that equation, with the phenomenon of Reiki itself. And it's a really wide open question. And it's one that I wouldn't say I have a definitive, forever solid answer to in this moment. I have a lot of questions, a lot of inquiries. It's a question that I'm going to continue to live into. And I think one that we could spend, we could incorporate into our work with Reiki in general. But when I sat with this question, what does it mean to be in integrity and in good relationship with Reiki as a phenomenon in the world? Where it really began for me and really began to settle in is, what is my question to the world itself? What is my question to nature? What is my question to the cycles of life? Because when we're talking about Reiki, that's really where we see and where we can best interface with Reiki is in the living natural world. Reiki, from the perspective of its Japanese origins, is spiritual energy. It's what animates us and connects us. And the concept and the embodied experience of interconnection is really what the system of Reiki as a system of practice is directing us towards and supporting us in achieving, to remember that we are part of an interconnected web of life. And so for me, if I want to be in good relationship and in good integrity with Reiki as a phenomenon, then it really begins with noticing my relationship with the web of life, with the land that I live on, with the plants and animals that are in my space. It comes down to, how do I tend that land? How do I align myself with it as an ally, as a friend? To what degree am I orienting the rhythms of my life alongside the cycles of nature and the rhythms of nature itself, so that not only can my impact on the world be a positive one, reducing as much as possible the negative environmental impacts that my life has, but also how can I, feel a part of the world, feel a part of life, beyond my own limited, individual existence. So that's really where this question led my thinking and my practice, and will continue to as I continue to sit with it. For those of you who are watching this video, I'm aware that my video is lagging behind my audio in this filming. I don't know why. We struggled with the technology. I think it's the storm that's going on outside, nature presenting herself in a very dramatic fashion in my Central California region. But I'm just aware that my mouth and my sounds are not aligned in this video. So it is what it is. Hopefully it's entertaining. So that is where I will land, and I'll turn it back over to you, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michaela. And maybe one of those videos that you listen to, not watch, and then it won't annoy you anymore, but
you go.
You wouldn't even be able to notice. Yeah, and I really appreciate your thoughts on that. I think it is really helpful to distinguish just between Reiki as the phenomenon, as the energy of Reiki, or as I have been thinking about it as you've been talking, is just an integrity with spirit, spirit itself. And so there's this integrity with spirit, and then there's also this integrity with the practice of Reiki. And I think that those two, it's helpful to distinguish those two. And for me, as I'm thinking about it and been exploring this topic, I really realized that, integrity, spiritual integrity, is somewhat of a wound for me. It's a wound. And I can look back at my upbringing in a fundamentalist Christian culture and some of the gender indoctrination and a lot of the ways in which spirituality was imparted to me as a young child was very fear-based. And it was very based on if you don't do this, you're going to hell, or if you do that, you're going to go to hell. And as a young child, of course, that was all quite frightening. And I know that many people that I was in upbringing with are still really involved in that Christian faith and that way of thinking and that way of living their life. And for whatever reason, I was kind of the odd one out, and I rejected a lot of that. And I've been going through this process and built my real whole life on this process of just really being true to my way and being true to my own spirituality. And there was times in my life where I just completely ignored spirituality and felt like it wasn't an important part of my life because I had so much pressure to have it look a certain way when I was growing up. And so, as I've come kind of full circle with all of that, there was times where I just really just didn't even want to go near spirituality discussions, really explore my own spirituality because of the spiritual trauma that I endured when I was a kid. But now coming back full circle, I've really embraced my spirituality, and I've really been found an ability to embrace that spirituality through the practice of Reiki. And so for that, I'm so deeply grateful because it really brought something that was really meaningful back into my life. And I can still look through some of these lenses and realize that in a lot of ways, I feel like I have to be in spiritual integrity with myself. And that's some in part due to the trauma I experienced as a child and this wound. But it's also something that really deeply serves me as well in my life. And that I'm very sensitive to that feeling of being out of integrity or out of alignment, or feeling like one of the things I really had to work through is to let go of the sense that something above me, some God in the sky, is judging me for doing something right or wrong. And the practice for me has been opening myself more and more up to unconditional love, and feeling that I can be connected to this whole web of life, the whole universe, to maybe even something as simple as God itself, and feeling that connection and being in harmony and alignment and receiving from that deep well, that deep source within me. And so that's one of the ways that like I both process that trauma and be, and work through it. But also recognizing that it is important for me. Um, and yet I also have all this woundedness around it. So um, the other aspect I think that's important is this whole system of Reiki. And as we talked about in other videos, I talked about my own perspectives on, cultural integrity and spiritual appropriation. And one of the ways that I've really chose to be in alignment with the system of Reiki is just trying to teach it as purely as I can, incorporating the elements that came from the Japanese origins of Reiki, but also being really authentic with my own experience of it and not being like tied to a book or a definition of what Reiki is, but really having my experience of Reiki be alive in my own awareness and experience, and the energy in the room when I'm teaching or practicing Reiki. That's really important to me. And then also thinking ahead to like the generations of Reiki practitioners after me. So thinking about what legacy and what role I play within the lineage, and where I feel like I've really aligned with my way of being, who I am, just as a person, not really so much as a Reiki practitioner, and how do I bring that uniqueness that I am into my practice, to the way I teach, but also doing that in alignment with, how does that empower my students? How does that empower my clients? To be true to their way, to be true to their essence. And sometimes, there's been many times in my life where I've made choices that from an outside perspective, probably nobody could ever understand. And, but I made them, and I was actually living them out of integrity for what I felt was right and what was important to me. And I think we all should have more freedom to do that, to kind of unrestrain ourselves from social norms, from misaligned ways of being, from the pain of gender indoctrination, and all kinds of things that, the society puts a pressure on us to act or perform or be a certain way. So I think within the context of integrity for Reiki, there's this kind of spiritual freedom, this permission to be ourselves, and to see how we can untangle ourselves from ways of being that aren't us, and giving ourselves more freedom to live from that place.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question with a lot of layers of subtlety, right? Because, there could be, in a certain sense, a tension between some of the perspectives we've shared in previous videos and some of what you're sharing here. And that is, to be in integrity with the cultural origins of this practice. And we spoke to that, from the perspective of white American practitioners of this Japanese practice, and how important it is to really root our practice in an understanding of the history and culture and spiritual perspectives of the time and place where this practice was developed. And we've recommended aligning one's teaching and one practice as much as one can with that, and at the same time finding those places where, as you're saying, our authentic self gets to be expressed in our practice as well. On the other hand, we're saying that there's this intuitive relationship that we can build with Reiki as a phenomenon in the world, and that is guided by ourselves, by our own experiences, our own perspectives. And that like there's potentially some tension there between those two things. And I think that tension is something that I work with actively in my practice. It's a question that I live into, and really I'm feeling my way into what is the right balance for me. And I go back to, fundamental teaching that my Reiki teacher often speaks of, which is to be firm and flexible in our practice and in our teaching and in our life in general. Firm meaning, what is the structure? What's the container that holds our practice? letting that structure, designing that structure to have integrity, to have, a strong foundation, to have, walls and supports that really hold our practice well. For me, that container is the system of Reiki as closely as I can align it with its Japanese origins. Those origins are complex. Mikao Usui designed a system of practice that was based on his personal experience inside of Buddhist and Shinto practices from his position as an upper middle class man living in a literal empire. The system of Reiki as a folk medicine has existed long before Mikao Usui's time, and even long before Buddhism entered the country of Japan in the 6th century. So even the question of what does it mean to be true to the origins of Reiki has layers of subtlety depending on how we approach it. But to simplify it for our purposes here, again, for me as a white Western American woman, to what degree can the structure, the container of my practice be as well aligned with those origins as possible? And then from that structure, where can my authentic self, my ethnic lineage, going back to various cultures in Europe, my experience as an American in the 2000s, my particular interests and passions, relationships, the conditions of the world and the culture that I'm inside of, all of those things come to bear on the relationship that I have with my practice. And those are the points that are flexible inside of that firm container. Those are the points where my intuition gets to come in, my experience. And when there's tension between those things, right, those are places for us to really settle into our practice itself and to, build our capacity to be with that discomfort, to make more room for it, to make more space of understanding around it, so that we don't do the thing that can so often happen when we're uncomfortable or when there's tension, which is to kind of shut down around it or ignore the source of the tension or simplify things in ways that leave things out. And that's an ongoing practice all in and of itself that I really invite all of us into. And I feel really grateful that practicing Reiki in large part increases my capacity to be with all of that discomfort and complexity. But dialing it back a little bit, when I think about what does it mean to be in integrity with the practice of the system of Reiki in the way that I have shaped it. So everything that I just said is a little bit of background of like, how does my practice get shaped? How does it look? What is it based on? Given all of that, integrity with my practice for me it really has to come back down to what degree am I embodying the precepts, because that really is the foundation of the system. It's really describing the outcomes of the system of practice, what it is that we're orienting ourselves towards as we're working through our practice. And the precepts are simple, they're not easy to embody on a daily basis, moment by moment, but they're very simple. And there's a lot of space inside of embodying the precepts that allows for bringing our full self to bear, bringing our intuition into the experience of it, the practice of it, bringing our own positionality, our own particular needs, and what we've experienced in our life. So often when I'm working with students in Reiki classes, that's really the territory that we're navigating. Where does the simple set of, guides, this North Star that we're orienting ourselves towards, that's described by the precepts, how does that meet the lived experience of our life and its particular quality and its particular challenges and joys that each person brings? And that's a really dynamic and exciting journey to go on for myself and with other people. It's this particular alchemy, that looks different each time with each person. That particular alchemy between this simple set of precepts, the invitation to use a system of practice that helps us embody those precepts in our life, and then the particularities of a person's life. How do those things come together? And to our conversation here, how do those things come together with integrity? And so I think, yeah, for me, with all of that I just said, that got a little bit convoluted and complicated, where it just really rests is, what's my relationship with the precepts of the system of Reiki? And what is my relationship with life itself when we're talking about the phenomenon of Reiki in the world?
I love that. And I love how you were speaking to tensions. And I think that that's really a good word for the feeling that we can feel, whether we're in integrity or out of integrity, or maybe there's a question of whether or not I am in integrity or not, needing to look at that more clearly, to sit with it. And, integrity, is that tension, I think, is, and as we've been through all the layers, if we were just, individual beings, I think it would be so much easier to be in integrity, but we're interconnected beings. And I know within my family dynamic and life, like, I'm a mom to young kids, and I have to navigate not only just integrity for myself, but I can't necessarily put that in front of integrity for my kids. Or so there's always just this kind of back and forth, moving a lot of dynamic pieces. And obviously I can't do the work of integrity for my children. I'm not saying that, but sometimes it's like, what's best for me isn't always what's best for my husband or my kids or my family dynamic. And so I think especially moms, like, our kind of little world of what we we have ability to really explore with our own spirituality within our practice and life, can sometimes be a little bit smaller, especially when our kids need a lot from us. I'm definitely in that stage right now, but it's been a lot of like tensions around trying to navigate what's best for me, what's best for my family, and staying in alignment with myself through that process. And so I can really appreciate that. And I think it's important, when you feel and sense into those tensions, is to not necessarily judge yourself for them, but actually recognize that those are the interplays where practice would be most useful.
Yeah.
And I love that Reiki offers us this simplicity of practice. And if you, as our listener, have done, like a reflection on the precepts as a daily practice for a period of time, you'll know that, there's no stepping into the same river twice. It's always different. It's always unique. The day and our challenges present themselves in different ways if you look at it through the lens of the precepts. And so I think that that's where the practice comes alive for us, and why it sometimes doesn't fit into a Western mindset, which is a little bit more like, oh, okay, well, I'll try that on for a little bit, and then, like, I'm gonna change my clothes, I'm gonna change that spiritual practice out and put on a new one and put on a new outfit. So the precepts invite a lot of diligence, and what's the right word I'm thinking? Not just diligence, but keeping at it, not just doing it once, but doing it over and over and over again to see more benefits the more you practice it. And so, and from my point of view too, there's like, over the last 100 years, the time of Reiki, there's been like a huge resurgence or a whole shift and evolution, really, and the way most of us probably view spirituality. And there's a movement, they call it in sociology, of spiritual, not religious. And I definitely identify as spiritual, not religious, in my own orientation. But I think a lot of people nowadays do. And I think Reiki has really fit that piece where we've been able to use something like the practice of Reiki to access our spirituality, but do it through a more fluid, more open, more freedom-filled means. And for that, I'm super grateful. Like, Reiki has been that pathway for me. Yet I also think that comes with challenges, and especially the way Reiki's practiced in the West. And we've talked about this quite a few times in our videos in this series, but sometimes in which, just like I have to navigate different roles, different needs within my family. Also, there's that bigger question of how we're using the practice of Reiki, or we're using it in alignment that allows this medicine to be given to other people. Are we excluding some people out of the practice unintentionally, like people from different cultures or from different religions, from different backgrounds? So all of those things, it's like this kind of dynamic tension that I think we all can feel in that subtlety of the connection to Reiki and spirit, and finding our own unique pathway. And all of that is truly personal. Like nobody can do that for you. And yet we're all in the midst of doing it. And I think the benefit of going through all these different layers is that you probably feel more permission to grow into those places where you bring that extra special piece. You bring that extra, you bring your skills, abilities, your gifts into the system of Reiki, to the practice of Reiki. And from there, you can really build a really dynamic practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a really good example of a place where there's this dynamic tension, right, in this concept of spiritual but not religious, because I think that description really does summarize, much of kind of modern American spirituality, and for good reasons. You mentioned religious trauma. There's a lot of ways in which the rigidity of certain religious structures and the ways in which that rigidity has been used for oppressive means that really, turns away from a lot of the fundamental spiritual truths of, many of the traditions that are being used in that way. It's a whole other conversation. But for a lot of reasons that makes sense. Many Americans don't want to associate with organized religion or structure. And so we see that in the ways in which spiritual elements from other cultures that are religious in nature are brought into, Western American practice and, kind of scrubbed of their religious context. We see that very clearly with mindfulness meditation, for example. Mindfulness meditation in its original context is an advanced Buddhist practice. It's explicitly religious and it's advanced. Here in America, it's taken completely out of the context of its religious setting. It's presented as its own practice that's separate from any other practice, and it's presented as something that one can step into as a beginner and work with in various ways. And there's a lot of benefits of that, and there's a lot of downsides of that. Of taking something totally out of its context, something that again is advanced practice, and presenting it in this way. So for Reiki, there was a very explicit scrubbing of its religious foundations when it entered America. It is a practice that was built on Buddhism and on Shinto. It is a practice that comes out of religion, and it has been divorced from it in a large sense, when we look at Western forms. And there's, benefits to that, as you've described, a sense of greater freedom, a sense of being able to make it one's own, to not be, confined into the structure of a religious context, of not having to affiliate, with any particular religion in order to practice the system and to benefit from it. Those are all positive things. And there's quite a bit that gets lost when we do that. And not only, things that get lost that would help us to be in greater integrity with, the culture that it's from, but also things that get lost in terms of its effectiveness, how the system actually was originally designed as a coherent whole inside of a context. When it's taken out of that context, there's actually quite a bit of effectiveness that we lose. And so there's a tension there. How do we grapple with that, right? How do we create a system of practice for ourselves that feels in good integrity with ourselves, with the culture that we live in, which is a different culture, if we're speaking as an American to Americans and people who are not Japanese, then how do we reconcile that with those origins and be in good integrity with it? And I think there are simple answers to that, and we've spoken to some of those answers already in previous installments of this conversation. Simply knowing that those origins are there and speaking to them and addressing them and affirming them is a really good start. Understanding that this is a practice that came out of religion. I am myself, I don't identify as a practicing Buddhist, but I know a lot about the esoteric Japanese Shingon and Tendai traditions that fed into the system of Reiki, and some of them I practice actively. One does not have to be a practicing Buddhist to be in good integrity with this system. However, I think it's important to understand that those contexts are there, that is the root of this system, that it is inherently a religious foundation that this system was built upon. And then if we choose to take that into our life in a way that is spiritual but not religious, how do we continue to honor those traditions in our practice? There's no one good answer to that question, but it's even just living with the question, being aware of the need to ask ourselves the question is a really, really good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's so profound. And it points to the fact that, not only can no one do that work for you, like no one should judge what somebody else's unique. If you've grappled with that question and come to your own unique answers and had your own unique insight or vision of how you want to be in relationship with Reiki, be in integrity with Reiki, and also being in that right relationship with culture, with Reiki itself, with its origins. It's a complicated thing. And so I know for myself, I give myself a lot of grace and doing my best to do better when I know more. And when I know more, I try to do better. So adopting this mindset of Kaizen, which is a continuous improvement. Every time I teach a class or do a workshop or film a podcast, thinking about how I can do better, working on myself to be a more pure vessel, to let my flow move through me in a more balanced and harmonious way. But I think also in the within this whole conversation, we've got to dive through all the different layers for self, for others, for culture. And I'm sure in all of that, whenever I've done a journey like that, I always uncover a wound. Always do it, almost inevitably. And so we encourage you, if you've been listening and following along with us through these different layers, to reflect back on where that there might be a feeling of a lack of integrity, maybe a self-judgment or self-criticism around integrity, and kind of using the concept of spirit or spiritual integrity as like the container that holds it all. And one really profound thing I've learned on my Reiki journey is that space is the container that holds it all. And we talk a lot about grounding within traditional Reiki, and how grounding into the earth is actually somewhat of a myth, because the earth, we ground it into the earth. Well, what does the earth ground it into? Well, the earth is grounded into this gravitational pull around the sun. And then what is the sun grounded into? It's grounded into a bigger gravitational pull of the Milky Way. So there's nothing static or still or free of movement in our practice or in our spirituality. There's always something moving and shifting. And so space is actually the container that holds it all. And I think of space as analogous to spirit. That even though we can say, oh, we can compartmentalize spirit and say, oh no, let's explore that in the 6th video at the end of our journey. And it can be the end of our journey. It also can be the beginning. So starting from the inside out, or also from the outside in. as we do that work, spirit holds all of the other layers, and there's that essence of spirit in each one as well. And so we encourage you, if you've come up against some tension, some struggles, some wounds that have showed up for you, is to look at those areas with a lot of care for yourself, and to as an entry point to use your practice. Use your practice within those areas. And always our wounds are great teachers for us. And
they are indeed. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this series. It's been fascinating, and it's been exciting, and it's been a real honor to get to walk this conversation with you, Carrie. And I really look forward to the conversations that will get sparked by this dialogue, and not only in our own conversations, but in what comes up for folks who are watching. We will provide links to all of the videos in this series, which have been moving back and forth between Carrie's channel and mine over these weeks. And we will leave a playlist for all of them down below.
Yeah, so maybe one more thing right before we leave. I wonder if, Michaela, you can talk a little bit about just some of the benefits that you feel like integrity has allowed for you, like as you've explored this topic for yourself. What benefit came out of that, all of that for you?
Yeah, a good question. Gosh, what really kind of comes to the surface when you ask that is a release of worry has come from being in integrity. There's so much less that I feel like I have to be anxious about, worried about, concerned about, because I've put in the time and the work over the past, however many years, to align myself with my values. I love that how you started with that, right at the beginning, that integrity begins with being aligned with our own value system, and that being well aligned with that and making choices and taking actions that are aligned with what we value and what we feel in integrity with, it releases us from so much anxiety, because I know that I am grounded in something, and that if somebody takes issue with that or disagrees with me on how I'm approaching something or how I am speaking of something or teaching to it, that I can allow their disagreement to be present. I can listen. I can, challenge it if I feel like it. I can be with it. I can let it be, because I am just clear with why I'm doing things, what my motivations are, what my alignment is, what my values are. So, that's personally how being in integrity, and again, doing the work to do that consistently, has impacted me over time, is a release of anxiety and worry, because I feel just very solid in my motivations and in how I'm making decisions and how I'm behaving, ultimately what my behavior is in the world. I don't have to worry about it. And then, rippling out from that, I can feel good about how I'm showing up. I can feel relaxed. I can feel, I can feel connected because of that integrity, because I'm not worried about how I'm showing up. So I would say that that's kind of where it begins. We could talk a lot about, how that impacts, the communities and the world moving out from that. But I think I'll just kind of stay right there with, for me, how has it impacted how I feel in the world? And release of worry would be where it begins.
I love that. And I feel like I've had the same benefit, that it's just like when you've gone through all those layers to really look at the question closely and come to your own conclusions. There's this alignment that happens. There's this freedom. There's this flow that, there's not as many hangups in the hang-up closet. and you just feel more prepared to do what you're here to do, to share your gifts, to be the person, the healer that you are, and to be that unique facet of the lineage of Reiki and continue the journey of the practice, long to future generations. So,
Absolutely.
well, we'd love to hear from you as well. What's your big takeaway from listening in to the series on integrity? Please feel free to share that with us in the comments or send us an email and tell us a little bit more about it. Lean into the resources that we've provided, both on spiritual appropriation and also the financial resources we've provided. We are open to hearing more from you in the future. And if you have a future struggle in the world of integrity down the road, we are allies for you. Thank you so much again for joining us on this journey. We hope the practice of being true to your way and navigating this role of integrity for Reiki practitioners brings you lasting benefits.
Indeed.
So thanks again, friends. We'll see you again down the road.